Hi, like 2 days ago I came across a video entitled Why Reworking Content is Bad for RuneScape, and as someone who loves using a good catchy title to have people watch your video, it piqued my interest. So in this video I will be exposing the major and minor points from it while responding to them. Now, as this is a response video, I just want to say that if you want to watch it in full, link will be in the description for you to check out. Okay, so I think this is a good starting point. While the title says rework, I think there is an important distinction to be made here. I think that what a lot of people want of old content is an improvement to it, not a full-on rework. Essentially, when people say they want a rework, they mean they want forestry, not necessarily mining and smithing rework. Not that full reworks are bad in the context of this video and how people seem to use this word, it just means that people would love older content to be improved upon, not fully reworked.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you should and shouldn't be wanting out of RuneScape. That is something for everyone to decide on their own. I have my things that I would want, and other things that I really do not want to happen within RuneScape, and that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of communicating with the people who make RuneScape, because, you know, we can have discussions about it, and maybe some of these things will or will not make it into the game.
Well, I entirely agree with this. Yeah, people will like different activities and have different approaches to the game, so it is entirely reasonable to have people want different things.
And the way they make money is by having as many people play their games as possible, which means interaction. This interaction is also gauged in engagement. The more people that engage with a piece of content, the more successful it is, because, you know, especially in the case of RuneScape, that means more people are members, which means that there are more people that pay them and the more money that they make. Now, why that's important to understand is because this really applies to even reworking content, right? Let's take player-owned houses as an example. It's a piece of content that I see a lot of people always bring up, besides minigames, for a rework. Player-owned house is a very left behind piece of content within RuneScape in general.
Yes, engagement is oftentimes a driving factor of what companies choose to devote their resources to. I don't necessarily have much to comment on this, I just included it because I think it's an important piece of the argument that needed to be included to not misrepresent anyone. Okay, so here we have our first example, the player-owned house.
A lot of people would say rework it like they did in old school, but what's the point there, right? Because quite frankly, old school's purpose for the house are mainly teleports and health restoration. Well, we got health restoration at wars / at the bank, and we got teleports with things like Passage of the Abyss, and, well, yet again, War's Retreat, and portable fairy rings and portable spirit trees. So, quite frankly, we don't really need it.
Okay, and here I have my first big issue with the arguments being presented. You don't need it. I actually very much dislike this argument, and let me break down as to why. First of all, we need to understand one thing. RuneScape is a sandbox MMORPG. Sandbox games usually mean you have diversity in what you do or how you approach things. This is important to understand because it recontextualizes the "you don't need it" argument. In a sandbox game, there's plenty of things you don't need, but it's not about necessity, it's about choice. So, let's grab the old school RuneScape example. The player-owned house, it is mostly used for teleports, HP restoration and spellbook swap. But do you want to know a little secret? We already had those things. Yeah, that's right, the POH rework in old school RuneScape did not bring anything new to the game. All of the things that were introduced to player-owned houses in that update were things that already existed in the game. The restoration pool was a method that people used by going to the Clan Wars portal, which would restore stats, HP and prayer. Later on, with the addition of the Desert Elite diaries, we had access to the Elidinus statue, which did pretty much the same thing, but it overhealed you. And now, Ferox Enclave is a pool that offers the same thing Clan Wars offered without needing to go through the portal. Meaning, we didn't need this pool in player-owned house. However, it's not about the need, it's about the choice. Another example is Among That Glory. In the game, you have a normal Amulet of Glory, which teleports you to certain places in the game, or an Eternal Amulet of Glory. Difference? The Eternal Amulet of Glory has unlimited teleports. So there's the mounted Amulet of Glory you can set in your POH, which existed before the rework. So again, why would Jagex release a Glory Amulet with unlimited teleport charges if we already had unlimited teleport charges from the Glory in our POH? Choice. It all comes down to giving players choice. Funnily enough, I would actually argue that old school RuneScape's POH is too overpowered, but that's something for another day. As a different example, let's grab War's Retreat. Okay, so we don't need POH rework because we have War's Retreat. What if I'm like really into the skilling part of the game and I just don't do PVM? Then, all of a sudden that, choice of using my eye construction level to have access to the same rewards people that do PVM have would come handy, huh? Okay, I'm being a bit snarky, but this is the main issue with the argument surrounding necessity when it comes to a sandbox game, is that you'll fall so short once you realize people will interact with the game differently than you. This is something RuneScape 3 players oftentimes have a hard time understanding, looking at how many people tell me I'm wasting my time by just playing the game a certain way or interacting with a certain piece of content. The rework also brought the house viewer, which more easily lets you view the layout of your house and change rooms around without the need to cumbersome delete them or rebuild them. The key thing about such rework is that the rework didn't bring anything new. It merely polished what was already there by making it better to interact with and by giving players choice on how to interact with them. So, at its core, it wasn't about needing the content, it was about giving players choice while polishing an already existing piece of content. This is something old school RuneScape does a lot. They will grab older pieces of content and just polish them to make them better to interact with, since that is already a good rework in of itself, and it gives players reason to interact with it simply because it exists and it feels good to interact with. Ironically perhaps, old school RuneScape players are still asking Jagex to change how construction is trained, cause plenty of people still dislike it, which is why mahogany homes or construction contracts in RuneScape 3 even came to be. But again, that is not a shiny new replacement, it's an alternative that gives players pros and cons and thus a choice on how to train construction.
And a lot of people would still say, well, make it into something fun, like something social or something engaging, but then again, that requires a lot of resources to rework it.
I mean, so do most updates? I don't think the requirement of resources is a good argument, since everything requires resources. It's all about managing said resources into things players want. To give an example, the player's avatar rework. A visual rework players have been asking for ages. This takes a lot of resources, sure, but it's something players want. Ultimately, while Jagex isn't gonna throw resources at something they deem not needed or something they would deem a waste of resources, as players and as paying customers, we create those resources with the menu we provide Jagex with, and therefore the resources are used in what the paying customers want. So even if a player avatar rework takes time and resources, the players deem it necessary, and therefore it's being worked on. And let's face it, a lot of the improvements other pieces of content need don't necessarily require an exorbitant amount of resources. It's all about weighting the resources you have with what you can do, and there's so much content in RuneScape 3 that would be relatively easy to touch up, rework, or just improve on. As I mentioned in the beginning, most people want improvements to that content to feel more relevant and not clunky, not necessarily full reworks. Seriously, I doubt I need a full team and months of development for someone to change pest control starting requirements to be one person instead of 5. Small changes like this can be the difference maker between a piece of content still being used despite being old, or a piece of content being so forgotten I bet most players don't even know it exists.
It doesn't only affect a lot of bosses, also quests and even skills when you look at mining and smithing, because if melee is not relevant, why on earth would you ever train mining and smithing besides doing some quests here and there? There's no point. So the rework on combat was needed. That is something they could not shy away from like they otherwise would when it's a lesser piece of content that is less effective than, for example, POH.
Okay, so there's a bit to unpack here. I didn't want to show the entire thing, but essentially the gist of the clip is that Jagex is doing a combat rebalance because it affects the wider game, and it's something absolutely needed they couldn't shy away from. The thing is, they could. They just chose not to because, again, players were asking for it. First of all, let's get one thing clear, combat isn't being reworked, it's being rebalanced because Necro is way more OP and way more satisfactory to use than other combat styles. Secondly, we gotta understand that unless you are a mega late game player which will use a lot of styles because they will be weak to different bosses, with how much gear the game possesses, most people will probably just stick to the one combat style they choose, which is why whenever there is a change made to any of them, people complain. This is most likely the reason why Jagex is rebalancing all of them. It's exactly because they want you to use the one you want, rather than being forced into the one that is OP. I don't think this is the best approach, as I think just like old school RuneScape, we should have a more horizontal progression and more emphasis on NPC weaknesses, but truth be told, DLC ruined a lot of that, and I don't think that this is a place to discuss that. Again, I understand that there will be a point in the game where you do need different attack styles because of weaknesses, but again, because one attack style is so OP, Jagex wants to make the others also worth using because players will probably still use them. Of course, this is a big rework that requires a lot of resources because ultimately RuneScape 3 PVM is by far the biggest part of the game. That's why they are giving so much attention to this. I don't think it's necessarily because they needed to rework it. Again, ironically, the rebalance is to make the other three styles as satisfactory to use as Necromancy so players can make a choice and don't feel forced into using Necromancy because Necromancy is so much better. Again, are you catching the pattern of giving players choice? And about POH not having a wider effect on the game, it's an entire skill. Inevitably it's gonna affect the game, anything does. There isn't a threshold of how much something affects the game that then leads to needing or not needing a rework. Again, those who decide what gets reworked are the players, which are the ones that deemed a rebalance for combat necessary. Furthermore, and I am not gonna harp too hard on this as I don't think it was the argument that was meant to be used and it was probably just a mistake, but if melee sucks and people don't want to use it, why would people do mining and smithing? Smithing is unaffected by melee since firemaking is the support system for smithing and only strength matters when it comes to mining. Why would people do these skills if they aren't using melee? For their own rewards. Yep, mining and smithing are their own skills with their own rewards that people engage with, so I think it's a bit far saying that combat rebalance affects mining and smithing. Especially considering I've done both of them on a level 1 account and the difference isn't that big, it's just a nice help. For that, you can watch No Bank, the RuneScape 3 series where I play the game as an Iron without a bank, also known as an Ultimate Ironman in old school RuneScape. Link to the series will be in the description.
But if you look at the general consensus around RuneScape right now, on any social media platform, whether that's Twitter, Reddit, Discord servers, even within the game itself, in my comment section, in Protox's comment section, in whoever's comment section, is that the game is dying, that the game is very stale right now, there's no new content, yada yada yada, and that is because all the main developers are working on fixing combat.
We got a bit of stuff mixed here that in my opinion doesn't entirely belong together. First, let me address the social media sentiment. As I've explained in other videos, I don't use social media for RuneScape. I've done it in the past and that led me down a path of old school RuneScape is dying and the old school RuneScape team is destroying the game and every update is bad and the game's garbage. The game is better than ever. Social media can give you a super warped perception of the game state and entirely spin a narrative as well as just not allow you to enjoy the game. If everyone I follow on Twitter is always saying my game is bad and it has problems, yeah, I will probably not be enjoying it as much as if I just hang out with friends and we go bossing together every once in a while. Then we have the mix of stale, dying and no content. These are not the same thing. A couple of months ago I made a response video to No Monkey where he had a lot of worries about the future of old school RuneScape. Ironically enough, he looked at RuneScape 3 PVM as a positive example we should follow in old school RuneScape. Yeah, the grass is greener, always on the other side. Now, I bring that video up for a simple reason. Most of his worries were simply due to playing the game too much. Of course that if I play RuneScape 12 hours a day, there's gonna be a point where I simply ran out of content. That is especially true when we take into account that contrary to old school RuneScape, RuneScape 3's culture is much stronger around the efficiency mentality, which just speeds things up. I think RuneScape 3 players are feeling the same way. Yeah, of course I feel the lack of new content when I've done everything in the game, but the answer is not to rush developers and tell them to look at me and fuck everyone else. The answer is to just take a break or take it slower. As far as the game dying thing goes, it's not. It's simply stagnant, which is a different thing. I would argue that one of the main reasons is that contrary to old school RuneScape, where players have a choice and thus always have content to do, in RuneScape 3 we don't, because while old content is irrelevant, offers nothing, and is absolutely clunky to interact with. This again ties to what I just said in my previous point. One last thing I want to mention in this clip is the fact that, as far as I know, Jagex works in teams, meaning usually a rework is undertaken by a team that can carry it out, while other teams work on other things. So much so that since the combat beta started, we also had one of the biggest seasonal events ever with the Easter event. I wonder which ghost likes to code. Still, point being, content is still being worked on. I would argue that people's perception is simply worse than what it actually is. In old school RuneScape, content tends to take less time to develop, but not by much, and when it comes time to actually being implemented, I would say it actually takes longer because of the extra polling and feedback that is constantly required. The reason why RuneScape 3 seems to be much more devoid of content, or, according to NoMonkey, why it seems to have much more content than old school RuneScape, is that RuneScape 3 content isn't talked about much. In old school RuneScape, content gets talked so much because it needs polling. Now, you might think this is the right approach to the game, to continuously talk about what you're working on. However, I made a polling video addressing the pros and cons of constantly talking about content before it arrives in the game.
And new content will always drive more engagement and interaction than an old piece of content, because that old piece of content a lot of people already played. It's way better to design a stellar new piece of content, even if it's a mini game.
I would disagree with this for one simple reason. New shiny content gets old. New content becomes content people already did a few weeks, if not a few days after release. When Necromancy came out, a month after Necromancy coming out, people were like, well, we're done with Necromancy, when's the next update, even though Jagex just released an entire skill which takes months if not years of work. This is not to mention the fact that sometimes designed newer content that is better designed than previous released content isn't always an easy task and will take far more resources than simply reworking the old content already existed in the game. This argument also doesn't take into account something else I find important. With how much content RuneScape 3 has, how many people have done pest control on their new accounts, for instance? Yeah, there's a lot of old content people haven't done because it's clunky or just dead content, which is why a rework would benefit it. This argument also glosses over the fact that rewards can actually spring new life into content that was previously forgotten. The perfect example of this is the Shades of Morton minigame in old school RuneScape, which was slightly reworked to be easier to interact with, provided some new niche rewards to the minigame, and nowadays it's more popular than ever. It's still not Grand Exchange levels of popular, but again, it doesn't need to be. And also, there are other ways to increase engagement that don't involve new content entirely. The collection log in old school RuneScape made a lot of pieces of content more alive, like Shades of Morton for example, which led Jagex to then understand what needed to be reworked with the minigame because now there were players actually interacting with it. While RuneScape 3 has collection logs, they don't have an overall system like old school RuneScape does, which is a shame, I must say. And to top it all off, the best part about having up-to-date content is that as a result, people just overall have more content to do. One of the reasons why old school RuneScape feels far more endless than RuneScape 3 is the fact that there are a lot more relevant things you can do for your account at any given time, because you are also allowed to have different playstyles that you can just change whenever, which leads players to just try a lot more things without the frustrations of, oh, this is dead or clunky. All of this does a better job of contributing to the longevity of the game, taking pressure away from developers and allowing them to release new content as they want.
Right? Like, let's say Jagex decides to design a stellar new minigame that has good rewards, good experience rate, even makes you a little money here and there. It would be 10 times more successful than revitalizing something like Pest Control or Stealing Creations or Castle Wars or whatever it might be, because those designs are just not up to the times anymore of what we want nowadays. Sure, you can stick some rewards to Pest Control or whatever, but even so, even if you make Void really good, then you need to keep it relevant, because otherwise in a couple of years we would be in the same place as we are right now.
Let's touch on the first thing here, the XP and rewards. I hate this idea. The reason why some pieces of content that are old are entirely irrelevant to today's game progression is exactly because of the mentality that every new shiny thing needs good XP and rewards. Sometimes the fact that its content is already a good reward in of itself. Ironically, this is exactly the other argument I want to dispel that was made right after, which was about Void, where you could make them relevant but in a few years they would become irrelevant again. Sure, but that happens because every new shiny piece of content needs even better rewards than what we already have in the game, leading to this vicious cycle of things becoming irrelevant pretty fast. But what if those rewards instead were a choice people could use rather than something that needs to be relevant or irrelevant to the game? A few weeks ago I made a video if that content should be removed, and one of my main points was how I would much rather Jagex rework it, since that shows more long-term care for the game, as well it gives players choice to what they want to interact with. And again, we can just use the same argument I already used. Sure, in a few years Void will be irrelevant again, but reworked content can be content because it's reworked. In old school RuneScape, people asked for Soul Wars to be introduced to the game. The reasoning? It was fun. Now, I know RuneScape 3 players don't understand what fun is. Fun, spelled F-U-N, is this concept of people doing stuff for enjoyment. I know, it's crazy, right? Snarkiness aside, sometimes a piece of content doesn't need OP rewards or shower you with XP, sometimes being fun is more than enough. And lastly, one of the main reasons why we should rework older pieces of content is not the rewards, but the gameplay itself. It's a bit weird to say that we shouldn't invest time into reworking older stuff because the rewards will become irrelevant, when most people want reworks not because of the rewards, but because they want older content to simply be more apt to today's standards of gameplay and not be as clunky. I think it says a lot that the mentality of RuneScape 3 players when it comes to content instantly goes to the rewards and not how it feels to engage with. I think this video is a very good example of a fundamental issue I see with RuneScape 3. Why bother spending resources reworking older content if I already did it? This is a mentality I've encountered with old school RuneScape at some point, but I think people there have learned that if we just make the game better, it will be better for everyone. I think this is one of the main reasons, as I've stated before, why most people that try RuneScape 3 don't really stick around and why the culture surrounding the game isn't as strong, making the game feel dead or stagnant, whichever one you prefer. Secondly, I don't enjoy most of the focus being on the rewards. I think that when it comes to older content, bringing it up to date means making the gameplay less clunky, not adding OP rewards or XP showers to make it relevant. Yes, I will make a video about that someday. Ultimately, I think, and looking at old school RuneScape, it is much healthier for the longevity of the game to cultivate a culture where you take care of the game, old and new content alike, which leads to an overall prolonged interest in the game. While RuneScape 3 has new shiny content all the time, its content doesn't last long, and contrary to old school RuneScape, you don't have side content to distract you because you simply don't want Jagex to invest in it. Fun fact, I haven't visited Valarmore yet, despite being apparently an awesome update. This is because I've been busy with other pieces of content in the game, since old school RuneScape has a lot of those, so I don't need to go to the shiny new piece of content because well, I have other stuff to do. It will, someday I'll get there. Look, if there is something I wanted to take away from this video is that I think RuneScape 3 players hate fun, and that you should 100% quit that garbage game. Now, on a serious note, I think it's important for players to think about how they interact with the game and how that might impact everyone else. I'm not saying you need to want exactly the same content I do, but it does mean sometimes we need to acknowledge that something we might want to take advantage of because it's great for us might be really harmful for the long-term health of the game. Golden Cape buffs. It's important to look at how we view the game, how we interact with it, take a step back, and sometimes realize that maybe we are asking too much. At the end of the day, it's just a game meant to be enjoyed. If you are not having fun, is it because the game is constantly bad despite the fact that you keep playing it? Or is it because you are just approaching it wrong? Or maybe you simply don't like it, which means you should probably go do something else that you actually enjoy, right? Also, and this is super important, go watch the original video, link will be in the description. I don't know a lot of people that do content discussions, much less about RuneScape 3, so I was pretty happy finding someone who actually does them. I might entirely disagree with that video, and honestly, from what I've seen so far, a lot of their videos, but if you do go watch it and come from me, you better behave, please don't be toxic. As for my snark or my aggressive tone, as some people have pointed out in the past, that's just how I speak. Don't think this is a personal video or a personal attack to the person in question. But yeah, if you like this video, subscribe, like, buy me bread, rant and mild, break your windows and recite the invocation of Satan. You know, the normal YouTuber stuff.